The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Now every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when Jesus was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. The Gospel of our Lord. Well, as I said, on Christmas Eve we had 275 people. Not so many today. Mary Sue was counting, maybe 70, not 275, but this was to be expected. Everybody knows about the popularity of church going on Christmas. The whole Christmas season is a happy season filled with get-togethers, and it's balanced a bit, I guess, by the mandatory dues one must pay with their time to come to church. But even Christmas Eve worship, I think it's kind of nice. And maybe even the CEOs, the Christmas Easter only crowd, I think maybe they even enjoy it. We sing familiar hymns. It's dark and candlelit. It's a nice evening. The vibes are positive, and we get to focus on a little baby in a manger. What's not to like or to believe in there? Babies are very cute. Everybody wants to hold a baby, I think. When you have kids, I don't think taking care of babies is really the hard part. With a baby, you just have to feed them and hold them. To be a good parent to a baby, you basically just have to be a good mammal. There isn't too much higher level thinking required. And that makes me wonder if this is part of the reason Christmas is so popular too, because there isn't that much higher level thinking required. You can just focus on the baby in the manger and project all of your wishes or desires onto that immobile, adorable baby. But I can tell you when parenting gets really hard, it's when the kids grow up and they talk and act out and roll their eyes at you or say nothing and do nothing. That's when it gets really, really hard. And that's what our story today is about. Jesus at this age, he's 12 years of age, so maybe we could imagine that he's about the same age or about the same height as Mary, and at that crossroads between youth and adulthood. Maybe Jesus thinks he's very independent, thinks he can do everything himself, but at the same time around the house, "Mom, I'm hungry. Mom, where are my shoes?" This is when it gets really hard. And our story tells this story. Jesus goes missing, and his parents look for him for days and days and days, and they're worried sick, and they finally find him in the temple. I've always had a hard time understanding the perfection or sinlessness of Jesus, whatever that means, because in this story, it sounds like Jesus is the one at fault. Kids, when you go somewhere, tell your parents where you're going. Write a note. Give them a call. Send a text. Do something. Jesus doesn't do anything today. When I was looking at our bulletin cover, at first I figured that this had to be Jesus. This kid with the bad haircut and the ripped robe and the skinned knees. This sounds more like a runaway, but we see little divine Jesus in there. Jesus in this story seems like he's the one at fault, and Mary and Joseph seem to acknowledge that because when they find him, they say to him quite rightly, "Why have you treated us like this?" And I wonder if this makes Mary and Joseph think back fondly to Christmas Eve, when Jesus was adorable and immobile in the manger, and they could do whatever they wanted with him. You have children, and you think you've created them, and you think they belong to you, but they don't belong to you. They are their own people. And this isn't just true with our families. I think there are so many other things that we try to control in the world that exceed us. Maybe wherever you work in the world, maybe you're important there now, but the place was probably there before you, and it'll probably go on after. Likewise, your church, and most certainly, your God. There's so much hand-wringing these days about the future of the church, the future of faith. No one goes to church anymore. What are we going to do? How do we make things like the good old days with 2 services, packed pews, everyone volunteering, youth mission trips, adult education? That was nice. How do we get back to that? But our relationship with God has never been about looking backward or about keeping God where we want him. God comes to us as a little baby, but that's one night. And then the rest of the stories we have about God is Jesus, is God running on ahead of us and us losing track of him or trying to keep up. And when we find him, he explains things to us, but they're challenging and confusing, and they're inviting us into new ways of thinking and being and doing. And all we can ask, quite honestly, is, what child is this? So we worship and we love a God that we don't control. And I wonder how this divine relationship might inform the rest of the relationships that we have in life. The story that Sherry read from 1 Samuel is a most interesting parenting manual. Sherry, you provided some helpful background. I'll provide a little bit more here. I've read a lot of parenting books, but I have never seen a parenting book make reference to Hannah's approach to parenting. Earlier in the book of 1 Samuel, we learn a bit about Hannah. So Hannah is the mother of little Samuel, and before Hannah gives birth to Samuel, she's not able to have children. And it's a point of great sadness for Hannah. And she weeps and weeps over her childlessness, and her husband, Elkanah, loves her very much. And he says, "Hannah, why do you weep? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" And Hannah prays, and she says, "Oh God, give me a child. And if you give me a child, the child will be yours." So God remembers Hannah, and she bears a son, Samuel. And it's this little Samuel whom we read about in the story today. Little Samuel who spends all his time in the temple wearing that adorable little robe that his mom makes for him when he's playing priest in the temple. This all sounds very cute. But the story also says that when Samuel is weaned, Hannah brings him to the temple where the old prophet Eli is. And the verse in the Bible just says, Hannah left Samuel there for the Lord. It's like she's signing Samuel up for a life sentence on church council. Just dropping him off on the doorstep of the fire station. And the little robe she makes for him Well, she only does that once a year, the one time a year when she sees him. So suddenly this story isn't very heartwarming to me. It sounds bitter and unfortunate. Hannah prays and prays and prays for a child, but then she gets a child only to give him away. But maybe that can be a bit of a relief. Sometimes I think it is so overwhelming to try and control everything. Do any of you know how to control your kids or your grandkids or your parents or your friends or your neighbors? If you know how, please tell me. As far as I've seen, the more that we try to control those around us, the more foolish and ungrateful we look. In this job, I spend a lot of time thinking about funerals. Those services we have to ponder the completeness or ending of a life. And I wonder, what do we call those services? Are they funerals or memorials or celebrations of life? I'm never really sure. But the language around them does seem important. And as far as I can tell, the best language that we employ around a service at the end of someone's life is language of thanksgiving. So that upon the conclusion of someone's life, we give thanks to God for their life. And it doesn't matter if it was a long life or a short life, if it was a very successful life that would be a front page obituary or a life that few remarked upon or noticed. It doesn't matter if it was a happy life or a sad life. Whatever the case, life is a gift, and we give thanks to God for it. And I wonder if such an expression of gratitude is also a proper expression of our role or our control over life. Mary and Joseph in our gospel reading are learning that they cannot control this little child of theirs. And in the reading from 1 Samuel, Hannah hands her child over to God. None of us can finally account for someone else. I'm not even sure we can account for ourselves, since all of us, ultimately, belong to God. You belong to God. And maybe Mary and Joseph realized this later, after our story. Maybe they realized this before Jesus became a man and died very young on the cross. Maybe Mary and Joseph were able to comprehend that all of this is a gift. The life of my child is a gift, and it's not to be hoarded or controlled or managed, but finally to be left in God's hands. And if they had said this, they would have sounded a lot like Hannah from 1 Samuel. And I think that would be nice, to see everything, everyone, as a gift, not as a problem or a project or a pending matter. Wouldn't it be nice to believe so fully in God's design and love for the world that we didn't feel like we need to constantly exert ourselves and control or make right everything that God has already created and called good? Very good. Richard Lischer is professor emeritus at Duke Divinity School. He taught preaching there for a few decades before he retired. About 20 years ago, Lischer received a phone call from his adult son, Adam. "Dad," Adam said on the phone, "my cancer is back." And Lischer nodded and absorbed the news with an economy of passion, trying to be tough on the phone, but the news was very bad. And when Lischer hung up the phone, he drove his fist into the wall and said, "This is robbery." And 95 days after that phone call, Lisher's son, Adam, died. And in the time between, the family spent time together, walking the stations of the cross, the stations of the heart, preparing for death. And when death came, the sting was great. Whatever Paul says in 1 Corinthians, the sting was great. But for Lisher, as he has reflected on the whole journey and whatever faithfulness he has been able to maintain or develop, it has been about not seeing his son's short life as a robbery, but as something else. He was my son, Lisher now reflects, and I give thanks to God for him. We give thanks to God. We give thanks to God for life. We give thanks to God for you.